For a machine that has become nearly as iconic to tank fans as the world-famous Tiger, T-34, or Sherman, the history behind the glorious KV-2 has remained out of the direct spotlight in most history documentaries and books. Today, however, we'll finally shine a light onto one of the most bizarre and beloved tanks to ever exist. Throughout history, there have been countless tanks, all designed to kill. But not all have been a success. What happened to the ones that never made it, and why did they fail? My name is Cone of Arc. Join me as we journey through time, uncovering failed projects and forgotten creations in Cursed by Design. The vehicle that would become known by such names as the King of Derp and Soviet Fridge began its life thanks largely, if not entirely, due to the Finnish defenses during the Winter War, especially along the Mannerheim Line. This conflict between the Soviet Red Army and the Finnish defenders not only showed the sheer number of soldiers that could be lost due to poor tactics, but also the lack of something capable of smashing through the defenses. The Klement Voroshilov, or KV, proved itself as being up to the task, outperforming the competing heavy tank designs and being virtually immune to anything that was thrown at it, but only possessing a relatively small anti-tank armament, it still could not inflict the damage needed to break these defenses quickly. To solve this, the Soviets began a program to develop a tank to meet these requirements. This would eventually lead to a design originally known simply as the KV Bolshaya Bashnya, or KV Big Turret, and would begin production at nearly the same time as the KV Small Turret, as the 76mm version would be known. This designation was of course later simplified further to KV-1 and KV-2 in 1941, and I'll be referring to them by these names for the remainder of the video, although I must point out that these pre-production tanks were never given the designation. The urgency of this design was shown in the extremely short design time given to produce the tank. In just 2 weeks, the designers were able to create the first of the prototype turrets designated MT-1 with the 152mm Model 1938 howitzer. They were then sent for trials near the factory. In total, 4 KV prototypes would get the big turret. KV U1 to U4 all had the big turret. U0 was also given it, but was given the 76mm turret after factory testing. These tanks were then sent to the front in Finland. Upon arrival, the tanks were given to the 20th Heavy Tank Brigade for combat trials and showed remarkable results. In one instance, U0 reportedly received 22 hits without being knocked out of action. According to some sources, Finnish anti-tank guns actually stopped firing at the tanks after 3 non-damaging hits. This is quite believable considering at this stage of the war, the Finns were so low on ammo they did everything they could to conserve what they had. The immense size and armor of these tanks earned them the nickname Dreadnought by their crews. Overall, the performance was acceptable to Soviet command despite the tank's many faults, not just due to the teething problems of the KV itself, but also due to the fact that the bigger gun and turret increased the weight from around 45 tons on the standard KV to an excess of 53 tons. The turret alone weighing 12 tons. This caused immense strain on the turret ring on top of the stresses the engine and gearbox had already been experiencing. Following the successes of these prototypes, an order of 100 KV-2s and 130 KV-1s was given, although 20 pre-production turrets had already been produced with some slight alterations. The final version of the KV-2 differed from the pre-series tanks quite significantly. To attempt to remedy some of the issues and simplify production, the turret was completely reworked, scrapping the previous angled MT-1 design for a new rolled plate which created a 6-sided turret with vertical walls called the MT-2. This created 2 distinctly different looks to the KV-2s. You may know these by their more common Western names, the KV-2 1939 and KV-2 1940 respectively, although these names were never actually used by the Soviets themselves, only being given the KV Big Turret and KV-2 designations. The MT-2 also featured a new gun, the M10S 152mm, and a coaxial machine gun to replace the pistol ports from the MT-1. This turret was then tested on hull U7 and would go on to become the basis of the production version. Despite these changes and the 2-ton weight reduction of the new design, it was still impossible to overcome the main weaknesses and the turret ring would still be pushed to its limit. This caused the tank to take a full 36 seconds for a full 360-degree turn of the turret using the electric traverse or with the backup manual system. The tank would also need to stop on flat terrain to be able to fire it, since the immense recoil could cause damage if this wasn't done, not to mention the tendency the turret had to traverse on its own towards the vehicle's lowest point, making it very unsafe for the crew and surrounding soldiers should that result in the top-heavy machine falling over. Following U-7, the final production version of the vehicle began to be produced, with a ball mount for an MG added to the front hull and turret rear for further close defense situations, along with a slew of other minor changes. Although I should note here that the early pre-series versions would also be pressed into combat along with the final design. By the end of its production cycle, a total of 204 KV-2s would be built, with 4 pre-production vehicles, 20 more with the pre-production turret, 80 with the production turret in 1940, and 100 more production tanks in 1941. To keep this video from getting too long, however, we'll save some of the stranger variants of the KV-2 for a future video and now discuss its performance in combat against the Germans. Right from the start, the tanks were plagued by problems. The beginning of Operation Barbarossa would come right at the end of the production cycle, but replacement parts were few and far between for the new KV-2s, meaning that many units were under-equipped with spare parts and ammunition, as well as being untrained with the tanks. Some units hadn't even received any ammunition for the tank at all, and most crews had less than 10 hours of training due to the Soviets classing the tanks as secret weapons and keeping them in storage. These issues were then mixed with the rapid attack of the Germans, which caused the slow, lumbering KV-2s to be pushed far beyond their capabilities. Despite this, however, the KV-2 could still cause quite a headache for the advancing Germans, with their thick armor being resistant to all but the most powerful anti-tank guns at the time. Unfortunately for the KVs, their original intended role of slowly advancing to destroy enemy fortifications, which fit the Soviet battle doctrine, could not be done. And instead, the tanks were used directly in defensive combat against advancing enemy units, which was yet another thing the crews and army as a whole were not properly trained for. In that role, they fared badly, being largely abandoned by their own crews, with the Soviets occasionally using them as basically mobile bunkers at strategic defense points. In this role, the KV-2 could be truly devastating to the attackers. The Germans at this time were still mainly using 37 or 50mm anti-tank guns with similar armaments on their tanks, which could barely scratch the armor. To knock out these tanks, it was often only possible by closing the range with infantry or by heavy artillery bombardment, as only the 88mm flak gun was truly capable of dealing with the armor. Although that being said, the Germans were quick to learn that by immobilizing the tanks, the crew would often bail out rather than trying to continue fighting. Despite this, both the regular KV and KV-2 were able to help heavily delay German attacks, which in the long term contributed greatly to stalling the Blitzkrieg, allowing the Soviets to hold back the push and later counter it. Probably the most famous example of this tank in action is the story of the lone KV during the Battle of Rzeszów. During the fighting, a single KV-2 positioned itself at a crossroads behind the front line. This crossroad was vital due to the fact that the surrounding area was swampy ground, meaning vehicles could not pass through. On the 24th of June, as the Germans tried to move some of their wounded soldiers as well as captured Soviets back east, they spotted the tank. I can only imagine the Germans on the convoy probably thinking it was just another knocked out tank, that is until it opened fire on them. The Germans then pulled their convoy back, fearing this was part of an expected Soviet counterattack. The KV was then able to destroy 12 trucks from a supply convoy attempting to move to the troops on the front. Clearly this tank needed to be knocked out, and the Germans threw everything they had at it. Reports differ on the exact details of the engagement, and it's possible that the tank was in fact a KV-1 and not a KV-2, although new evidence strongly suggests it was in fact a KV-2. But regardless, the results were the same. This one tank and its brave crew were able to stop an entire assault in its tracks for a full day. This incredible story served as the basis for the Rzeszów Heroes Medal you can earn in the game World of Tanks. If you'd like to see me cover this in more detail, I'd be happy to, but for sake of time, I won't in this video. By the end of 1941, nearly all of the KV-2s in Soviet service had been abandoned, destroyed, or captured, with only a few managing to make it into 1942. It is possible that at least a single KV-2 was still in action as late as 1943, with one photo existing showing a tank with the number 528 on the side. The use of captured KV-2s by the Germans in general is also relatively unknown. Many were captured during the invasion, and they were eventually placed into service with the designation KV-2 754R, with some receiving a German cupola to improve vision for the commander. Some of these modified KVs were to be issued to Panzer Company 66, which was a special armor unit with a range of rare vehicles, which was planned to be used to invade the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. But this was never done after the disaster of the German invasion of Crete, and the fate of the tanks in this unit is as unknown as the captured KV-2s used by other units, although evidence points to most being lost in battle or abandoned in the winter of 1942. Sadly, only one of these unique and significant machines survives, with a production KV-2 on display at the Russian Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow. Although there is also one replica in the Battle Glory of the Urals Museum, also in Russia. I'll put the town name on the screen for those of you who are interested because there is no way I would pronounce that correctly. In the end, although this tank contributed to the halting of the Blitzkrieg and subsequent Soviet victory, it was cursed by a number of design flaws that made it impractical for the type of combat it was needed for. Despite these flaws, the KV-2 is still beloved by tank fans around the world, and in games like World of Tanks, it still serves as a source of fear for those facing it, just as it did all those years ago. Thank you as always to my YouTube members who helped me get the surprisingly expensive source material to allow me to make such a lengthy and detailed video. I also want to give a special thanks to Francis Pullman, who helped me ensure this video was as accurate as possible. He has a channel of his own where he detailed the history of the KV family of tanks, as well as other Soviet machines, and even wrote a book on the Soviet T-35. Links to both his channel and his book will be in the description. Please check them out, he really knows his stuff when it comes to Soviet tanks. As I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to see more videos on other uses of the KV-2, as well as the story of the Rezhenai tank, please let me know in the comments below, and consider becoming a YouTube member yourself as it's the best way to directly support these videos. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and check out the other episodes of Cursed by Design in the playlist on your screen.